Okay, so welcome to Transparent Conversations. And this is, I think, season 3, episode 11. So my name is Neelu. I am the creator of Transparent Conversations, and this is Christian. And today in this episode, we're going to discuss the importance of media literacy and why it is important for people in general to have more media literacy, especially in the digital age and with the dominance of social media and how most of the information we acquire in reality about the world, we get it from social media and the internet. So, from my perspective, I think media literacy becomes paramount. And even though I am, of course, mediating this discussion, I still have a lot of gaps in my perspective on media literacy. I was not educated in it, but that is why I'm doing this episode with Christian, who has a degree in journalism and he did study media literacy. So he will be talking about why he thinks media literacy is important, and I guess where media literacy is missing in current times and what we can do to mitigate that. So, Christian, what do you have to say around this?
Let's see. I'm trying to think of where to start. So, well, for one, media literacy is important because of it's a very topical issue right now because of what they call fake news.
Right.
And I feel like what's dangerous about the media is that people know that media is bullshit.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. Some people think that their media is,
because it's first of all, it's subjective.
Mhm.
But then, I guess first of all, let us expand in terms of what media means. So media coincides to social media like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Mhm.
There's that obviously, and then there's also media like the news that we watch, right? CNN, Fox, MSNBC. We're talking about all of this, and then also coming to newspapers. That's a form of media, but in this day and age, a lot of newspapers have gone digital. So there's digital media. So are we talking about all these platforms?
Well, okay, so more specifically, I guess we would be talking about news media.
News media,
So
like what?
Specifically, like anything that has to do with like current affairs, whether on a global, national, or like local, sort of lens. Anything that deals with current affairs.
Okay, got it. So more.
At least that's one way to narrow it down, because if you want to look at like the technical definition of media, that media includes music, media includes film.
Right, because music can portray a political message. Right.
It doesn't even necessarily have to be political. Media is just, from what I remember, if I'm correct, it's kind of synonymous with mass media. So mass media is, you think of like how people communicate, right? And what we're doing is interpersonal communication right now.
Right.
Right, and then there's also intrapersonal communication, which is like communication with yourself. Right. So that's another form of communication.
Yes.
So you think of those different kinds, and then you also think of mass communication. So mass media is a form of mass communication. So when you're communicating something to like a large audience, that's mass media, mass communication, kind of sort of the same thing.
Okay, got it. All right. So now that we've defined what modes of media we're referring to, where does media literacy come into play? And I mean, what does that even mean? What does media literacy mean?
Yeah, so, okay. I guess I was trying to narrow down the conversation to news media, but media literacy, it can also apply because that's what we usually think immediately of when we think of media. Right. We usually think of like the news, it's
fundamental,
right? Yeah. And on social media, like usually you're referring to news that you get on social media,
right?
But like I said before, like media could also be film. You definitely need a sort of media literacy when it comes to analyzing a film. Okay. I feel like that's also a very important aspect of it. Okay. Which, just for the sake of this conversation, I feel like it's kind of almost tangential to news media. Like it's kind of like you're talking about something that's like, in some ways, there is some similarities to it, but I feel like you're kind of getting a different.
Movies can also be a powerful way where messages and narratives are conveyed to the masses. Yeah, absolutely.
But there's kind of like a different set of tools that you need to analyze film as opposed to like news media.
Of course.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Although at the same time, there's also similarities. So I guess I'll just focus on news media.
Okay. But again, coming back to the question, what does media literacy mean exactly?
So media literacy is, I guess an easy way to think about it is like just
in simple terms.
You break down the words. Literacy is like how to read. You know? Media literacy is like how to read the media.
Okay.
How to like how when you think of literacy, there's different like levels of literacy.
Right.
You know, you could be able to just read a book.
Okay.
Just get the message of the book.
Right.
You know, like I don't know, say. Okay, I'll give an example that kind of relates to what we're talking about.
Yes.
Dog bites man, right? Like if you have very basic literacy, you can kind of tell that what's going on. Like you know what dog means, you know what dog means, you know what man means.
Yeah.
Right, and you can connect those and get the message. But from a very critical perspective, man bites dog is it's a saying that like the reverse of it is kind of significant when you talk about media literacy. Because dog bites man is they use it like in like journalism school and or like any sort of class that talks about this stuff or any sort of book. It's insignificant news because dogs bite men all the time. But when you switch it around, man bites dog. Right. That's significant. That's a piece of news right there. Does that make sense? Because it's unusual. Yeah.
Can you kind of break that down? I mean, it's obvious why that you can say is more viral.
Well, yes. Yeah. So let me kind of stay on the subject a little bit. So the reason I bring up that example to begin with is just to show different levels of literacy. Like you could also go a little bit further into it, like know what a subject is versus an object in a sentence, right? The sentence doesn't have any prepositions, but if it did, then then you understand literacy on a little bit of a deeper level, right? So it's the same thing with media. Okay. Like you can know like how to look at a piece of media or how to read a newspaper, how to you have basic literacy skills, so you can like read a newspaper. But media literacy is also like taking like a even more critical approach to like consuming media.
Okay, so meaning basically in this instance, questioning the story to doubt how true the facts being conveyed actually are.
I would say that's something I would say that's like a result of knowing media literacy. I don't think that's exactly, maybe not the essence of media literacy, but it's an important like kind of aspect after.
Okay,
so media literacy, to kind of answer your question, media literacy is they are the tools for understanding the media. So I will give an example, like understanding who is writing this piece, right? Like let's just use an example of a newspaper. Who is the journalist that's writing this? Okay. Are they a reputable journalist? Are they even a journalist? A lot of times they'll have a name in a newspaper and a byline. This is more for like local newspapers that have like like small budgets, right? But they'll have a byline and you think it's journalists, but it's actually somebody that works for like a business, a PR representative for a business, someone in public relations. Right. And public relations is supposed to be like supposedly the opposite of journalism. They have kind of different goals. Right. Public relations. The
intention is to more, I guess, paint the light of a company or situation in a positive way, regardless of how true it may be.
Right. Yeah. What do they call them? I can't think of the word. Like there's kind of a derogatory term for them. Like spin artists is like one of them. Right. Disaster or something, like people that control disasters. Yeah. Cleanup crews, like those are names for people that work in PR.
Yeah, I bet politicians use them a lot. Yeah.
But the funny thing too is that a lot of people from PR come from journalism.
Of course.
A lot of them are former journalists that don't make enough money.
So they get that training, and so they're able to know how to formulate information and present it in a way that makes people sway in a particular direction.
Yep.
Yeah. Right.
They know how to communicate.
Right.
They're communication experts. Both journalists and PR people are communication experts.
Yeah.
A lot of times they're in the same classes in college. That they might have a similar degree.
Right.
A degree in communications or a degree in journalism.
Yeah.
There's no degree in public relations. I don't think. Maybe there is actually, but there's a degree in communications and there's a degree in journalism. Yeah, so that's one aspect of media literacy, knowing who is writing it, right? And on kind of a larger, even more critical lens. And also, like, is the journalist, if it is journalists, are they respectable? How much have they written? That type of stuff. And an even bigger scale is who is the newspaper, who is the publisher, right? So if you don't have basic media literacy skills, you don't really think about that stuff. You just might see something on social media that your friend shared, and you don't think about what the source is. Are they like so-called fake news? Like, do they just completely create this out of nowhere, right? Made up story,
right?
That's kind of the fear in the next election cycle. There's going to be a lot of made up stories created by large language what do they call it? LLMs.
So there's also this I guess, in speaking of being in the digital age and big data and fake information, we also have to consider the implications of new technologies that's coming out that can just output false information in literally seconds.
Yes, that's
so
that's
we're talking about when we talk about LLM, you're specifically talking about like machine learning algorithms and AI that can be used to derive, like even ChatGPT, for example, that are used by a lot of people. I think it's also prone to, I think it's called hallucination, this phenomenon, where all these large data sets are being fed into this algorithm, and it's still an algorithm that's learning, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the information that it outputs is going to be 100% accurate. So that's another variable on top of false information that is spread out by humans trying to.
And there's also the fear that, like, even if these, let's just say theoretically, these things were like perfect, just someone using it for like a bad goal of just creating lots of fake news articles.
Right, and I think even with that technology, there's this almost this dystopia of being able to use someone's voice, actual voice, and pretend like it's something that they said. So there's technology, algorithms that can actually do that, not just voice, but even their face. I think I forget the exact term where someone deepfake, exactly, and they can place people's faces on just some random body in a video, concatenated into a body, and it's just
it convinces some people.
There's a lot of manipulation that can take place. I mean, there could be wars over this.
There
could be a whole nuclear war over people doing this, which is really, really scary.
Yeah, and that's one domain. I feel like that's actually a domain of like the issue of not being media literate that actually I feel like gets a lot of attention, or I feel like it's going to get a lot of attention. I feel like there's other aspects that don't get as much attention, like even just the fact of we have this so-called divide in news media of liberal news versus conservative news or democratic news.
In the U.S.
Yes.
Specifically. Yeah, more so.
Yeah. And then it's like very tribal, and people think that that the Fox News stuff is fake news, and the MSNBC stuff is like fake news if you're a Fox News listener. But if you take an even I feel like people that see it that way, they lack media literacy skills, because at the end of the day, these are like these, most of the news is coming from a corporate lens. They are coming from companies that are usually conglomerates of some sort. They hold lots of different businesses within their umbrella. Some of those businesses don't even have to do with like media. They might have to do with like for the longest time, General Electric owns NBC, for example, right? Why does General Electric want why are they involved in a communications company, right? Like that brings up a lot of questions, and or even just like Washington Post. Like Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos. Like, why does he want to own it? Or even like Twitter, it's owned by Elon Musk, right? Why do they want to own this stuff?
Right.
They serve the corporate interest. That's why. And the corporate interest is even if like say a company like I don't know, for example, like a traditional media company, I guess let's just say News Corp or something like that, or Time Warner. I don't think they have any investments like outside of like media related stuff.
Right.
They also rely on corporations for like advertisement, right? And they have to serve those type of interests.
Right.
People own shares of these companies, so a lot of the ways they run like a corporation.
Right.
These companies, they consolidate with each other, and then they have to fire employees to keep the profits high and to reward shareholders.
Right.
Like that's really the ultimate goal of like these companies, like reward shareholders, like at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Whether it's just through like traditional media or it's through like something else that they're involved with.
Right.
So yeah, like the Jeff Bezos example is like very easily, like the Washington Post is going to put articles that are favored Amazon, and they're not going to talk about certain things with Amazon.
Right.
Like why would they? Like you think that you had a fair analysis from them? And there are examples. I've seen examples of like the Washington Post doing that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this, of course, I think it's really important that you point out these details, because one may be wondering, all right, then what information should I look for to understand the context or the motivation or intention behind someone writing an article, is to connect the dots. Now, for the many busy adults out there, right, life gets busy and we don't have just the cognitive energy to divide our attention and research every little thing.
Yes.
So what advice and suggestion would you have for us busy adults to be able to become media literate?
I would say one is, well, the first is to be aware of this stuff to begin with. To be aware that if you're unfamiliar, really, like if you're unfamiliar with like a news source, look it up. It really doesn't take that long. There's Wikipedia. Like Wikipedia could tell you a lot about a company.
You think Wikipedia is a good source?
Honestly, it's a good enough source.
Okay.
It will tell you some very basic things that you need to know with like a lot of accuracy.
Right.
Like like who's the holding company besides this that this media company exists under. Like it'll tell you stuff like that. It'll tell you who's like the publisher of this, like certain controversies that have existed.
Right.
You should always do further research, but to get a basic like understanding, like I feel like it's good enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what you normally do?
If I don't know something, yeah, I'll go to Wikipedia, and if I feel it's incomplete, or if later on if I have more time, I'll look into it further. I'll do some further searches on stuff.
Okay.
But Wikipedia it's a good way to get to know something right away. If you know, like again, if you know how to look, what to look for exactly.
Yeah.
So just look at really how big the company is and who owns it. That type of stuff.
Right.
And sometimes news only comes from corporations, from the corporate media. If you're an independent news media, you often don't have the staff, or the connections necessary. So, I mean, I guess I'll talk about that a little bit later, because it's sort of another lens of looking at stuff, like how media is actually written.
Right.
That's also kind of important to be aware of how it's written, at least a very basic process of it.
Okay.
But yeah, just doing that very basic research, and it's okay to get your news from like I have a ton of like criticism for the New York Times, for NPR, all these things I'm highly critical of, but it's also okay to get your news from them. Sometimes it's the only place that will like report certain things. It's okay to do it. Just be aware that like okay, they're probably missing something, they're probably omitting something.
Right.
Like this isn't probably not the full story. But they will tell you things that you need to know. They still, if a business like that didn't at least give you some correct information, like they would probably go out of business. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like even Fox News isn't completely fake.
Right.
They spin stuff, but they're not completely like bogus.
Yeah.
So yeah, just being aware of that, and then if you're really interested in the issue, sometimes even like business media, like very like something like the Financial Times is a very good example, or like the New York Times business section. They're very good to read because their audience is they are businesses. They are business people that work in that type of industry.
Right.
So they're actually trying to be a little honest to these people,
right?
You know, because these people subscribe and they pay money to these something like the Financial Times is like, you know, it's not cheap to get. So people pay money for access to this information, and sometimes they're kind of honest about certain things, you know, that companies are doing that aren't so like nice, but they wouldn't write it in the same sort of like sensational way that maybe an independent news source would write it, which like, you know, they might write as like a huge red flag. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, definitely. So I think just to kind of summarize, what advice you would have for busy adults is to, number one, look at who actually wrote the article, what their background is, what they're connected to, whether or not they work for a particular corporation. Usually, I guess is it pretty simple to get that information on a writer? I guess it should be, right?
It really is. It really is, yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the very basic way, just, you know, to see if anything, you could Google them and see if anything pops up. Yeah. And honestly, that's not the most important thing to do, but it can help you. I feel like the second thing that we mentioned is a little more important. Which is because you can't like, you know, realistically, you can't Google every single person that you like, you know, you can't do that. But it is one tool that you can use.
Okay. And the second thing?
But the second thing is that, you know, Googling a media company and looking at their Wikipedia page, you know, it pays off more because, you know, you're going to get more articles from them. You know what I mean? Like instead of like researching from a single journalist. Right. Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, if a corporation is paying a certain media company, would that information even be broadcasted on Wikipedia?
If they're paying them?
Yeah.
Again, these are just very, okay. So they're kind of like, what you want to look for is not even necessarily like controversies. Like they might show up on if a controversy does show up, then usually it's a big deal. You know, because a lot of controversies are hidden from Wikipedia.
Of course.
So if it does show up, then it's like, well, this actually showed up here.
Right.
What you want to look for again is who owns it, you know. Even sometimes, like if you're very unfamiliar with it, like is it legit? Are they, you know, like some of NPR like publicly funded? Who are some of the like biggest donors, you know, to NPR? Right. Because they say they're publicly funded, but ultimately, you know, most of their money comes from corporations, from corporate foundations.
Of course.
So yeah, just a very basic sort of like kind of search of like you know where this umbrella falls under. Something like News Corp, you know, like you look at like you Google who owns the Wall Street Journal, and I believe it's still News Corp. Maybe I'm wrong. And then you look at like Rupert, then you could see that like Rupert Murdoch owns this, and Rupert Murdoch is kind of like an infamous person. Like, you know, there's the TV show Succession has to do with him. You know, like that kind of raises a lot of red flags if Rupert Murdoch owns something.
Got it.
His umbrella, yeah.
Okay. Do you have any other pointers around media literacy? Of course, not to. I know whoever's listening to this most likely are not all going to be journalism experts. So this is just for like, you know, us civilians who are busy and have a lot going on.
So. Okay, so.
I mean, if those.
I'll try to simplify it. So. Awareness is really like what's key. So one, that most media is they come from the corporate lens. You're getting a corporate lens when you're doing the media. Doesn't mean everything's incorrect or, you know, you shouldn't trust everything, but a lot of things will be like slanted and twisted in the corporate, you know, the favor of the corporate interest. You know, why does most of the media, you know, what's going on in Palestine, you know, until kind of recently, like I've seen some media that's criticizing Israel because it's gotten that out of hand. But all these activists, you know, were saying that Israel is going to kill thousands of civilians, and the media was ignoring it. And all of a sudden, you have to pay attention because it's actually happening. But people were warning about it, and the media wasn't really reporting it. Most of it wasn't. And they changed their tune about it.
Yeah.
And that's because they come from the corporate ones.
Of course.
Yeah. So just understanding that.
Right.
Also understanding if you do get local media, independent media, I mean, that it's a lot of independent media is more politically partisan. I find.
Yes.
Which isn't even a bad thing necessarily.
Right.
That's also another thing you need to like be aware of what the political partisanship of media is. So the awareness of that, the awareness of also that a very good source actually to read is Noam Chomsky and I always forget the name of the other author because he's not as prolific as Noam Chomsky. But they wrote a book, Manufacturing Consent, which gives 5 filters of media, 5 filters of media that they call it.
Yeah.
I could read it like very quickly.
Okay.
And then give a summary. So I was actually reading it before, so I have it up already.
Great.
So the first filter says concentrated ownership, owner of wealth and profit orientation of the dominant mass media firms. So we just talked about that. Yeah. That's what we talked about.
Right.
Advertising is the primary income source of the mass media.
Yeah.
So we talked about that. Reliance on information provided by expert and official sources. We didn't really talk about that too much, and I won't take too much time.
Isn't that coming back to the writer or the presenter of the information?
Okay, so this is why we had another podcast about liberal arts education.
Yes.
And ideally, I feel that what's important in liberal arts education is mass media literacy. Or even like in high school, like they have journalism classes, like that's very useful. Right. Like if a kid takes a journalism class, because then you understand how to actually write news. And that's a very, like, if a high school student can do it, like, an adult can really learn it, like how to write a news article. And, like my life, like an idea that I have that I want to get done, by the end of my life is to start some kind of like network of citizen journalists. Where normal people can write about what's going on in their like local areas, because a lot of that sort of news is dying out. Yeah. But also, so to simplify it, like the very understanding on a very basic level how to write a news article is important. And when you write a news article, they teach you that you can't put your opinion in a news piece, right? So it has to be objective. But there's like ways to kind of get around that. And the way to get around it is using quotes and your sources. Yeah. And your sources are usually like, if you're, let's say, writing something about what the government is doing, it's going to be a government source, right? Right. And in order to get access to a government source, you need to build up a good relationship with them. Something like if people are familiar with like the show House of Cards, like that deals with that, like how they got close to government sources. Sometimes it's shady like that, but sometimes it's not. It's like more mundane. It's just writing stuff that's in favor of like, what the government's saying, like kind of just repeating what they're saying. Or a corporation, replace government with corporation. Yeah. If you want access to a corporate source, just you're writing in favor, because if you don't write things that are in favor of them, they're not going to give you quotes and information. Right. And then you have no sources, or your sources aren't as quote unquote reliable. Right. Yeah. So that's what's taught in these like programs. That's how journalists actually like write it. And you should also kind of question like the reliability of whether, those type of, like if that's what you're relying on, like of course they're going to tell you like good things about the corporation, the government. They're spin masters. Right. They're the PR people. Of course. So that's how all that stuff works. So that's mainly what that filter has to deal with. Yeah, no, that's great. So I specifically wanted you to go into it because, again, coming back to the fact that you've actually studied this. Yes. So I guess we can, well, is there anything else you want to mention? Well, there's 2 more filters, and I'll try to be quick with them. Okay. The idea of flack as a means of disciplining the media. So if a media company writes something that's okay, so let's use the example of like what's going on in Israel and Palestine. If at the beginning of this war they would write something that's like, these like lobbyists, these industry lobbyists consider unfavorable to Israel, because security tech industry is huge in this country. That's especially after like 9/11, that whole legacy of 9/11. And that's a big industry in Israel. So that's one of the reasons that you can't really like report this type of stuff. Like people will give like kind of like anti-Semitic like reasons for like, you know, why you can't say anything bad about, you know, in Israel, which is like total, you know, bollocks. But if you just, you know, use the lenses that we used before, you kind of like figure out like, you know, what the danger of this sort of flack is and why they only report one side.
Got it.
Because it hurts, you know, the shareholders. You know, they're always worrying about shareholders. About shareholders.
What was there another one that you were going to say, the filter?
Yes. So that filter had to do with flack. So if you basically if you report something that they don't like, you're gonna get flack. You're gonna get feedback. You're gonna get criticism for it. And then the last one is, sorry, the way this thing works is hard to read. External enemy. So when they were writing, it had to do with communism. Okay. So anti-communism. Okay. So communism isn't the external enemy anymore. But after 9/11, the external enemy became like terrorists. Like it was all about like terrorism. Like, you know, there's a terrorist like under your bed, in your closet, in the bush. And that was also kind of like how they treated communists. Like they were like, you know, is he a communist?
Yeah, you know? That was a big scare, and it still is.
Yeah, exactly. You would lose your job if you were a communist.
Yeah.
Some people were communists, some weren't. You know?
Right, they really demonized the whole idea to the point where it just became like
they demonized it because it was the alternative to how the capitalist system worked, and it was an alternative mostly in kind of fictional sort of terms, right? Because if you like, you know, what I would argue is that if you really look into it, like there's not as many differences between communism, at least the state communists, right? Which was what they focus on. Like when it came to like, you know, like the communists that actually fought against the Soviet Union, you know, and Czechoslovakia. I think it was the Czechoslovakia back then, and in Hungary, you know, where the communists came in and killed other communists. Like, you know, that's not really like because there were communists that were against state communism, and the media isn't going to give you that sort of nuance. So they're just going to like, you know, label all communists as the bad guys, not even talk about, you know, communists that had criticism for the state communists. Right. You know, so it just becomes this nebulous sort of like imaginary bad guy. Yeah. And then it became terrorism. And now it's became immigrants under Trump, I guess you could say, or people or nations sending immigrants over, or you know, China or, you know, whatever. Yeah. And under the Democrats, I think it's Russia. Russia is kind of like, you know, what the media mostly rallies around.
No, of course.
So yeah, creating enemies.
Right. Okay, so that's the last filter.
Yeah, so it's a narrative, and like those are the popular sort of filters that, you know, Chomsky and his co-author talked about, and of course it's you know, that's not the only way to like analyze media, but it's you know, it's an accessible sort of book that they wrote that, you know, gave ways of analyzing it. So I would suggest it for people. There's more to it than that, but yeah. There's also a documentary on this book that's very good that people can watch. Okay. On the it's called Manufacturing Consent.
Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky.
Yeah, and there's a documentary on it too.
And who's Noam Chomsky exactly?
He's originally, I guess you could say, a linguist. That's how he became like famous as a linguist in the 60s, and then under what they call the New Left in the 60s, which was like a renewal of more of what we call like intersectional now leftist movement that looked at like the incorporated elements of feminism instead of just like the old idea of the left was like working people, unions, you know, a lot of times often white, you know, working class men were like the main sort of like arm of socialism and the left. And feminist movements were kind of separate, and all these things were separate. And the left kind of integrated that. He was a major figure in that. And he's really old right now. He's still alive. He's still talking. Yeah,
no, he's very well respected.
But then, yeah, as he believed in that public intellectuals should kind of speak out, and he got that idea from Bertrand Russell, who also like spoke out and talked about a lot of stuff. So even though he's a trained linguist, like he's, I guess, sort of a polymath and a political scientist, just because he feels it's a like responsibility to do so.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that, Christian. Is there anything else that you'd like to add in terms of maybe either media literacy or advice for good journalism?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if anyone's listening to this, like, yeah, there's just a lot you can explore. Like even like the way that they film stuff. Like if you're looking at visual media, you know, like if you've ever like taken a film class, like they'll teach you about like, you know, camera angles and stuff like that, and that all also manipulates like how information is presented.
Right.
You know, and how like things are edited. You know, the editing process is
the
like
narratives that are portrayed.
But the narratives are also, yes, exactly, but they're portrayed through a visual sort of like way.
Yes.
And if you take a film class, that's also like a good way to get like media literacy.
Right.
Or like, you know, watch,
Yeah. You know, that actually really stands out to me because I mean, when I think about movies, I'm just like thinking, hey, these are, and maybe most people do, apart from film studies majors, I guess I'm just thinking, oh, this is just for entertainment. But you know, there can be a lot that can be integrated for movies for the masses, and just knowing like little elements that they can use to convey subtle or subliminal messages through movies, I guess.
Yeah, like a very basic one is like a low camera angle is to like make someone look powerful. So if they film something from a low angle, it's to show power.
Yeah.
You know, you think of like the big boss standing, you know, tall.
Right.
But if something's from a high camera angle, then it diminishes the person.
Right.
It makes them seem small.
Yeah.
Like even if you look at like crowds, like it makes like, you know, every individual in the crowd look like small.
Yeah.
From that sort of camera angle.
Yeah.
So like those are just very basic ones, but like those things apply for, you know, news media as well.
Yeah.
You know, like they use those sort of, maybe not very like blunt, like they won't use like a high camera angle to like, you know, like stuff like that, but they have their own ways of presenting information. It's, you know, just, even the established way isn't like, it's established for a reason.
Right.
You know, the way that they frame everything with the talking heads and stuff like that. And like, you know, the showing from chest up.
Right.
Like, that's all very purposeful.
Of course. Wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Christian, this was, I think this was a great conversation. Thanks for, of course, coming on this episode. And of course, I'm sure we'll have more. So stay tuned and we will end the episode here. Thank you for tuning in.